All right, so let's write our analysis for this. Now, like I said, I could talk about the use of nonchalant tone or the matter-of-fact one. I think for our purposes, I'm going to talk about the nonchalant because I can talk about how it begins and ends that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a paragraph as though I'm writing a longer analysis paper, and this is one of my body paragraphs, okay? So the first thing that I need is a strong assertion about tone, okay? Here's the thing. Narrators don't use tone. Writers don't use tone. Tone is what's shown through the language, okay? Again, make sure if we're writing for AP language or we're writing for rhetorical analysis, we say the speaker. If we're talking for literary analysis or AP literature, we say the narrator, okay? So, I'm going to say the narrator's nonchalant tone and then we want to talk about that contradiction between how people perceive presidential candidates and how this speaker is. So the speaker's nonchalant tone contradicts the reader's expectations about politicians. And then I want to tie back to overall purpose, which in this case, obviously, Twain is poking fun at the seriousness of politicians and their, I guess, the flowery language they use and things like that. Poking fun at the current state of politics. So what I have, and I'm just going to stop really quick and break this down. I have my device or technique, rhetorical choice, okay? I have what it's doing, and then I have the purpose. How does it contribute to the overall purpose? So if I look at the beginning, I'm going to talk about the apathetic part. So we're going to talk about the syntax. In paragraph 1, the narrator's apathy is revealed through syntax. Tagged on to the final line is the apathetic phrase, and I'm quoting, "Let it prowl." Now, I'm going to explain some context because if you've just seen this little quote, you're not going to know what it means when it says "let it prowl." So I'm going to say, this is the narrator's response. I'm going to go over here now. To possible scrutiny he may face as a presidential candidate. So this is a good example of sometimes you'll give a piece of evidence. For example, my evidence is obviously here, the "let it prowl." But in this case, I needed to give the context of what was happening around there. So if you remember, he's saying that, like, I'm going to own up to in advance to the wickedness I have done. And if any congressional committee is disposed to prowl around my biography in the hopes of discovering my deep and deadly deeds that I have secreted away, let it prowl. So he's saying that he doesn't care if they go dig into his background, right? Which, now we'll explain, such disinterest in public scrutiny is the complete opposite of most politicians. Which is what Twain attempts to ridicule. So what I've done in this sentence is I've tied back this use of nonchalance or this disinterest to talk about how that ties into Twain's overall purpose, which is to poke fun at politicians in general. Now, were I to stop here, this would be a perfectly all right paragraph. I would say you run the risk of getting a 3 out of 4 in the evidence and commentary because it's not necessarily perfectly analyzed and it could go further. But since I have more I can talk about with this use of nonchalant tone, I'm going to. So now let's look at the bottom here. And I think I'm going to refer to this phrase that I'd picked out, the syntax, right? And I'm going to say this nonchalant tone continues in the final paragraph. Or, I'm not going to say continues, I'm going to say returns in the final paragraph. When the narrator says, again, I'm saying the narrator because it's being narrated, it's not Twain saying that, says, and then I'm trying to read it while I do this, if my country don't want me, and then it says, I will go back again. Yep. I will go back again. Okay. Now, just like we did up here with the context, I'm going to go back and explain where in that quote I see the nonchalance, okay? And explain how is that nonchalant. Which in this case, I think that use of improper grammar even, that don't want me, I'll go back again, would be appropriate to talk about. But I'm going to talk about the if-then structure. So, syntactically, there's a fun word for you. It's just syntax, right? Syntactically, Twain employs an if-then structure that reveals how unaffected the narrator would be by losing support. Essentially, he says, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it so it's really clear how I'm creating that link. Essentially, he says, if his country doesn't approve, he'll just return, or here's where I'm going to link to that evidence, go back to life as it was before. So when we've talked about tone in the past, it's been really important that we talk very specifically about where in the language I'm seeing that tone happen. So this sentence was just to really kind of clarify that I'm referring to that idea that he's just going to go back. And that particular idea in that syntax is what I'm referring to when I'm talking about how nonchalant he is. Okay? Again, this nonchalant reaction, as shown through the if-then structure, I'm going to say if-then syntax, contradicts our perception of politicians and furthers Twain's mockery of those in political power. All right, that is one heck of a paragraph. So let's go back and read it. My handwriting got increasingly bigger as I wrote, but that's okay. So I'm going to turn on, I think that's going to end badly, so let's just use the pen here. I just want to be able to highlight some things for you. Okay, so like I said, right here, this is my assertion. Clearly says that the technique I'm talking about is tone, particularly a nonchalant tone, and to what effect. So it says the narrator's nonchalant tone contradicts the reader's expectations about politicians, poking fun at the current state of politics. Okay, I have that ending purpose, I have the technique, very clearly stated. Then I go into a transition sentence before evidence. So it says in paragraph 1, the narrator's apathy is revealed through syntax. Again, here's where I talk about my technique. Tagged into the final line is the apathetic phrase, let it prowl. Evidence. This is the narrator's response to possible scrutiny he may face as a presidential candidate. Again, providing the context of what was said when it said let it prowl. Such disinterest in public scrutiny is the complete opposite of most politicians, which is what Twain attempted to ridicule. Right here is my link to meaning or purpose. And then the second half of my paragraph. This nonchalant tone returns in the final paragraph when the narrator says, if my country don't want me, I will go back again. Again, there's my evidence. Syntactically, there's my technique again. Twain employs an if-then sentence structure that reveals how unaffected the narrator would be by losing support. This section right here, I am explaining the technique. Okay? It is really important that you explain the technique. And honestly, like I said, if I had left this paragraph right here where before I went into my second half, it probably would have been just a 3 because I didn't really do a great job of that up here, okay? But I made up for it down here. Then I says, essentially, right here, essentially he says, if his country doesn't approve, he'll just go back. This is the link to the evidence. So where I'm explaining where I see the tone, that's kind of what we talked about earlier in the year. To life as it was before. Again, this nonchalant reaction, as shown through the if-then syntax, again, connecting back to my technique, contradicts our perception of politicians and furthers Twain's mockery of those in political power. Purpose or meaning. Okay. Now, this is my first draft. Like I said, in revision, I would probably go back up here and explain this piece of evidence a little bit further. Where am I seeing the nonchalance in that? Because I give context, but I don't really explain why does that little added phrase show he's being nonchalant. That could be better. So in revising, I would definitely go back and add that. But because I make up for it with a more thorough analysis down here, this would be a 4 on evidence and commentary. So I hope that helps give you a little idea of how we go about analyzing tone, and I'll make sure that this gets posted as a sample for you.